Welcome to Mile High Reefers. I'm Scott Anderson, and today we're gonna go check out Ken's NPS tank he just set up. NPS are those non-photosynthetic corals. It's really at the forefront of reefing, and a lot of people aren't doing it because it's hard, but I wanna learn more. So let's go check out Ken's tank. But before we do that, I wanna talk about my latest venture, and that's Weekend at the Wholesalers. That's when I turn our local wholesaler hammerhead corals into Mile High Reefers. Right now, I'm doing it twice a month, every other Saturday, and the next one is Saturday, July 3rd from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. So if you like great coral at great prices, come down to Weekend at the Wholesaler. Follow me on Facebook. All the information will always be updated on Facebook. Follow Mile High Reefers. And this week, I've got 10 8-ounce bottles of PNS Pro Bio that I'm going to be giving away. Spend $25 or more, and I'll give you, or at least the first 10 people, a free bottle of PNS Pro Bio. So come down to Weekend at the Wholesaler, get there early, and get your PNS Pro Bio. All right. Now let's go check out Ken's NPS tank. I'm here with Ken Wingerter of Hydrospace. You know, the purple non-sulfur bacteria. Yeah, we'll link that video down before if you haven't seen it before. Thank you for being on the show, Ken.
Thanks for having me.
I'm loving your bacterial product. And today we're gonna talk about non-photosynthetic coral and really what it takes to keep it. I've personally always loved these corals, but I've never kept the tank because they seem really challenging. Ken, you've just set up a non-photosynthetic tank, so I think you're probably in a great position to kind of walk us through some of the good, the bad, and the ugly that goes along with non-photosynthetic corals. Because is it fair to say they're challenging?
Very much so. Yeah, with little we know about them right now. We know so much more about hermatypic corals, and have worked a lot on lighting and stuff like that. And now we grow them like weeds. So maybe there are a few locks to pick with this type of system, and they'll become easy someday. But right now, they're kind of a PETA.
So non-photosynthetic are cool. These are corals that don't use light. As you can see on top of Ken's tank, he's got no light. So we got to get all of this food to the coral through its mouth somehow. So we've got what looks like a pretty simple tank setup here. This is pretty cool. Maybe we should just start with looking at what you did to set this tank up, and then maybe we'll talk about some of the corals and the challenges that go along with keeping them.
Sure.
All right, let's check out the tank. Ken, your tank looks pretty simple and easy. Why don't you start off by telling me kind of what the tank is and the filtration and the setup on it?
Yeah, so this tank kind of started out as another tank. That was a test tank for our Hydrospace products. That was a 10-gallon that I kept a Dendronepthia in, and this Dendrophilia that we still have. It's almost had it almost exactly a year now. But that tank was run without any kind of filtration, just circulation, no lighting. And it was sort of a proof of concept, I guess. Again, mainly testing the bacteria and simulated yellow snow that we produce, and that was pretty successful. The Dendronepthia lived for a little over 5 months, and then being busy, I made a mistake and basically scorched the tank, rushing a water change, killed even the copepods, so it was pretty catastrophic. And that coral kind of just dwindled away. I think there's like one polyp left of that original Dendronepthia in here somewhere in that rock. But the Dendrophilia is still going strong. And anyway, the measured success that I had with that tank kind of inspired this one. So we wanted to expand to include other species and basically just see at a larger scale if it would work a little better. Again, this time, no filtration. I got this really simple stand just to emphasize the fact that there isn't even a sump. There's just literally just a power strip. That's as complicated as this gets. We used JBJ. What are they? Ocean Flow. I forget the name of the brand, but or the model. But we've got a couple pumps that alternate to kind of get like a ebbing sort of flow, I guess, back and forth. And the upper one in the middle here just is a constant flow washing over the surface, partly just to kind of keep the air-water interface mixed up, since there is no, we're not drawing water from a surface overflow because there's no sump. So that kind of keeps the surface waters clear of slicks and things like that, and promotes gas exchange. And then I wasn't even going to go with a heater, but I just kind of chickened out to make sure I don't get any really low lows. I think this type of coral can handle that just fine, but I wanted the stability. So the heater set at like 68 or some ridiculously low, but I just didn't want it to go way below that. Overall, it runs pretty cool. We have a heat wave here in Colorado right now, so it does get a little warm, but upper 70s, which to me is warm for this type of coral. It's actually set up as a deep water setup. It didn't necessarily have to be, but I went with just Pacific stuff, and I'm going to stick with that, which makes livestock selection a little more difficult. It's kind of hard to find non-photosynthetic stuff as it is, but when you restrict yourself like that, it gets a little tougher. But I wanted a kind of a nice representation of a particular habitat. So rather than going with the traditional live rock and aragonite sand, I opted for more of like a deep water volcanic Pacific Reef sort of substrate that's composed entirely of volcanic rock and fines, as they called them where I bought them. This black sand or kind of gravel. It almost like forms like a very solid. If you try to dig through this, it's pretty resistant. It's weird. It forms like a nice, like I won't have to keep digging this up. You know, it's like it really like packed together well, which is kind of cool. But and then you get these chunks that almost look like briquettes.
Yeah, so where did you actually get this stuff? This is pretty cool.
It was like at a local landscape company, believe it or not. Oh, nice. It's this exact same sort of, I forget what vesicular basalt is what that black volcanic material is called.
Yeah.
So the rocks I actually got at Petco. It's like the exact same material. It's just I needed some larger chunks. And this I stole from the neighbor's yard, so. But it was like a similar looking like igneous kind of stone or whatever that fit in. In fact, you can get this red stone too, even at like Petco. But I went with the black, so I don't know. It was a little bit harder to mix it in and make it look like convincingly like the bottom of the deeper parts of like a Hawaiian reef or whatever, like kind of what we've got. Carib Sea makes that Pacific. What is that called?
I don't remember, but yeah, the black rock and sand is getting much more popular, but you're actually doing it with the volcanic rock itself. Now, using the volcanic rock, are you worried about any minerals or anything dissolving out into the water and causing you problems? Or?
Yeah, that's a good place to start with water. So I rinsed and soaked and rinsed this stuff. And I just kind of thought it would be good to go, right? Because I rinsed it so well. But after I had filled it with the RO water and salted it and kind of committed to that investment, I realized after the fact that it was still leaching phosphate like I'd never seen before.
Wow.
So I started out with 0 phosphate. I know it wasn't in the water or in the salt, but I was up over like a few parts or more. No, it was... No, it wasn't that much. I think it was just under a part per million, actually. It was, according to my HANA tester. So, I mean, that's a substantial amount of phosphate that just kind of came out of nowhere, and I'm certain it just leached out of the substrate. So, I don't really know how to avoid that, like what I'd recommend, because I soaked it pretty well. I don't know, like, what else you'd have to do other than if there's, you could...
Now, is phosphate a big problem for these corals? Because I think on the reef side, we're all starting to want to push our phosphates, nitrates a little bit higher for our photosynthetic corals. In the past, we haven't wanted to do that because we'd struggle with hair algae and stuff like that. Non-photosynthetic algae are going to be less of a problem because we don't have light. Do these corals like a little bit of phosphorus, nitrate in the water?
Well, yeah, like all corals, I'm sure they do. The only problem is over a certain amount. Like a fifth of a part per million, you start to inhibit or mess with calcification. So, with your tubastrias and the dendrophilia, and actually both tubastrias, the micrantha too, also has a stony skeleton. So maybe the phosphate is somehow crippling them. I'm not really sure. I'd just rather have the phosphate at more acceptable levels. I'm trying to create a more natural system. But yeah, like almost hitting a part per million is unacceptable to me. So I actually don't know where it's at. I just did a big water change last night again and didn't test it again, but I'm kind of just slowly bringing it down by water exchange and also with the use of the PNS bacteria. So it's been a slow process because of the amount of food that I have to dump in here.
So on a natural reef, non-photosynthetic corals would be used to really low nitrates, really low phosphates, but then have very high amounts of food in the water itself. Mm-hmm. So what are you doing to feed these corals? You're using your PNS Pro Bio and Yellow Snow?
Yes, and I wanted to just stick with that originally because it is a test tank. These are always, every tank is a work in progress, right? Even a so-called test tank, you kind of do things. You get animals you want to keep just because you want to keep them. I had no reason to get this guy, but he was there, and and it happened. So I can't feed either of my products to this guy. So now I'm adding brine shrimp that I have to get to that in a bit. But in the micrantha, I just found online. That part of a story here that there were some other things in here that aren't here anymore, but and then the tube anemone again. Unbelievably, I've been watching this tube anemone. People think like, oh, they're fish killers and all this stuff, and I've always argued that. In fact, I saw a study where they found that their sting is significantly less than that of Aptasia, which is a strong sting. There's a reason we don't like those, but it's not the fish killer we think they are. They feed on marine snow and zooplankton. And actually, I've been watching because I think it's it's always been like the ProBio's really encouraged copepod growth. And it's hard, you'll never be able to see it with the camera, but there are swarms of pods in here already. It's insane how fast and I didn't add pods per se, they just came in with these frags, or these corals. But I've been watching the tube anemone actually capture little pods out of the water. If you sit there at night with a flashlight, and you know how they draw it into the labial tentacles in the middle. But you can barely, because they're even adult pods are teeny. Like it's hard to, you really have to sit and focus. But then you can see what's going on. It's really mind blowing. Like the tiniest zooplankton that this guy eats. So I haven't been feeding him a lot, or her, or whatever. But it gets some of the brine shrimp that blow off of this one. But yeah, to answer your question, now I kind of have to add a bunch of things because I'm sort of doing everybody. They talk about the shotgun approach. These corals are so finicky, and you would want to be able to feed them one or two different items to make things easier. but it just doesn't, especially if you want a diverse community of non-photosynthetic corals, you end up like with an extra refrigerator, because they just, even a single coral will eat 2-3 different things. So
Can non-photosynthetic tanks have a reputation of being challenging? What kind of struggles have you had with this tank?
this tank is very new. It's about 3 weeks old. But last week I lost some stuff that I had gotten after the first week from a large online retailer. That's where I got that was a shipment where I got the Gorgonian and the Micrantha here. I'd also gotten an umbellifera, which is like a silk tree coral, they call them, I think, and a Dendronepthia. Both, well, the umbellifera was a DOA, though I tried to save it and that didn't really work. And the end result was that as it died, it polluted the tank a little bit, and may have affected the Dendronepthia. It's hard to tell what got that one because it looked nice when it came in. It did not starve to death. That is an excruciatingly slow process. When Dendronepthias die, it takes months. This guy just disintegrated within a couple days, and I believe it was maybe and it looked good when it came in. I believe it was because of a parasite or a potential parasite that I'd found on it, a little white worm that I have not yet identified, have not seen before, but it looks like a specialized parasite of that species because of its color.
So crazy. Specialized worm parasites for Dendronepthia.
Yeah, it had the same like white color, and it was very much camouflaged against the body of the coral, and I wasn't able to retrieve it right away. Unfortunately, that particular coral, that piece, that Dendronepthia, just like the one I previously had a commensal Elphiid shrimp on it, which was really exciting to me because I really enjoyed having that first one. That lived, for months, but it was big and presumably old, and I don't think Elphiid shrimps live that long. This one was really small, but he didn't last after the coral died, so that was just really disappointing to lose both those corals that way. And the Micrantha is struggling. It looked fabulous when I first got it, and I power fed it some shrimp, chopped up shrimp, and it blew my mind. I'd never seen a coral eat like that before. But in just being busy, I didn't feed it for the next few days, and I really should have. I regret that now when those polyps are open, not just keeping it going, because now it doesn't open. It opens a little bit, but the polyps aren't. They're just these stubby little things that don't grab food. And I'm getting kind of desperate. I mounted it here and it looks good where it's at. It's sturdy, but it looks like I'm going to have to dismount it so that I can do the Tupperware feeding method.
Oh, wow. You are really needing some direct feeding on that bad boy.
Yeah, I mean, with the lights on, it looks absolutely terrible right now. It does open up a little bit more at night, but not to the extent that one could feed it, because it doesn't extend its tentacles. And it also doesn't really, its nematocysts don't appear to fire. You can put like a piece of brine. I literally almost have to stuff a single brine shrimp into every mouth, and that doesn't even really work. I have to cut the pumps, which the Gorgonian doesn't like. So that and I have to sit until lights out, which, yesterday morning I was up until 3 a.m. with a flashlight over this. That's not even physically sustainable for me. I'm living off of like a few hours of sleep now, trying to get these things fed at night. So both this guy and the other Tubastria, the Faulkneri or whatever that one is, I'm gonna have to do the bucket method, they call it, or...
Yeah, so it's kind of a training process to get these guys to open during the day, right? So they kind of get used to food in the water column, that kind of stuff. Maybe they'll open in the day, maybe not, but really these are going to want to open up middle of the night, which kind of makes them a little harder to display for average people.
At this point, yes, where the tank is lightly stocked, I'm hoping that after there's a lot more stuff. So this has just been set up, right?
Right, yeah.
It's very sparsely stocked, but at some point when it's just absolutely full of corals and maybe some fish, then it may not be as big of a deal to just throw like a few cubes of brine shrimp and just kind of let that disperse throughout the tank. Broadcast feeding will be an option later on, but right now where I only have a few corals, that's the challenge, a big challenge of setting up a larger NPS tank in the beginning when you don't have a lot of corals is the density of the food in the water has to be at a certain level so that the corals are able to capture enough food to survive, and that leads to a lot of waste. So at this point, that's just the struggle is, I'm changing out I'm doing like 50% water changes every few days because of the way I have to feed at this point.
So you're feeding your Hydrospace products. Are you adding any phyto, anything else to this tank?
I'm actually culturing some phytoplankton. It's a freshwater algae that was just an incidental algae that I had that I couldn't beat, so I eventually isolated it and grew it for a purpose like this down the road. It's freshwater. I think it's a desmid algae, but the point is it grows really well so that I can cultivate it in large quantities for something like this. I put in about 16 mils a day, and it's in a separate tank with a light on it and all that. There's a crayfish in there that we captured harvesting water milfoil last year that is a source of nutrients. So I feed him every few days, and then his waste products presumably fertilize the algae, and that's all that takes.
Oh wow,
they're
that's
not
awesome.
really a lot of work. It's not like some of the setups people have to put together to raise isochrysis or nanochloropsis or something like that. It was literally an algae I couldn't get rid of, so if you can't beat them, right? Anyway, that's in another tank that we can take a look at, but that seems to be working pretty well for the Gorgonian, the name of which I can't remember right now, but actually this is a book that I would recommend for anyone getting into non-photosynthetic stuff. There's some photosynthetic species in here too. It's just about soft corals and sea fans, of course, but there's an insane amount of information in here. Katharina Fabricius and Philip Alderslade. I think they're both researchers from Australia. But anyway, this is a hard to get book. You can contact us if you want to find it. I got this directly from the author. He'll sign it for you.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I wanted this book for years and years and couldn't find it. It's like several $100s if you just try to buy it online. But it's an really, really good reference for corals, particularly ones that you're not going to see in a lot of the aquarium books. Anyway, that's been really helpful. Right off the bat, I was able to use that to identify this Gorgonian. One of the few things that's really doing well in here so far, actually, and I attribute that to the phytoplankton.
And those are notoriously difficult to keep alive, those gorgs.
Mm-hmm.
So 20, 25 gallon water changes every couple of days seems kind of unsustainable. How do you plan to go long term with this tank?
You're right, that's an enormous amount of work. I barely have enough time to feed these guys, much less deal with the pollution. So right now that's a necessity. It's because of the displacement. There's a huge amount of sand in here, obviously, and I'm hoping that the bacteria colonize, especially the anaerobic areas of this huge mound in the middle, and deal, along with all the little critters, worms and stuff, deal with the wastes that will accumulate in here. But over time, after this is more established, the goal is to go from this huge water change regimen to one where I do almost no water changes.
So the bacteria will be built up in the sand bed and you're really working to create a very natural system. And is that part of why there's no filtration on this?
Yeah, so the mechanical filtration, that's just off the table immediately, because that would just remove all of the food that work so hard to grow and, or purchase at my cost to put in here, it just becomes extremely expensive detritus in your mechanical filter. Right. So mechanical filtration, in my opinion, for an NPS system, or maybe all systems really, is just kind of off the table. It's part of the reason I have so many copepods in here so soon. People struggle with that, I know, sometimes building up a big pod population. I don't even know how they had in the couple weeks enough time to reproduce to these levels, but it's insane at night to flash with a flashlight at the surface. That's because I think that there are no sponges, no socks. But then, UV sterilization, if you want to call that sterilization, UV will kill all of the microfauna in here that presumably are carrying out some of that filtration naturally. And yeah, some carbon might be of benefit, something like that. But right now I just, where you saw there's no sump or anything underneath. I kind of want to emphasize the naturalistic aspect of this setup. Maybe kind of a Lee Chin-Ang. Is that his name? The totally natural tank guy?
Yeah.
Lee Chin-Ang tank on steroids. So, eventually a goal of near zero water changes.
Wow. So you really are going for the ecosystem build. That's way cool. Ken, thanks for having me over to check out your non-photosynthetic tank. Really cool, fun tank. Although I have to say this is probably one of the hardest tanks I've ever shot. There's no lights on it. What are people doing for lighting on this tank? What kind of makes sense if you kind of want to show it off a little better?
With this tank, I'm more concerned about light pollution. Obviously, most people are trying to get more light on their tanks. Generally, your conventional reef tank. In this case, I would like for it to be as dark as possible, and I get a lot of light from the window over there and stuff like that. So I'm more concerned with light pollution. But if somebody really wanted to illuminate an NPS tank, even just for viewing, the most appropriate lighting would be actinic. So where we tend to overdo the blues on like our shallow water acro tanks, things like that, that actually works well on a deep water system because blue light penetrates more deeply, and that is why like deeper waters have that blue look to them.
That sounds really cool. Now, if we go down our spectral, we go from blue to UV, but you've kind of mentioned something pretty cool to me about what happens with UV as you go deep down.
Yeah, so ultraviolet gets attenuated in very shallow water, so you won't see any UV below. I wish I knew exactly how deep, but I can't remember. But you definitely won't, if you're trying to replicate a deep water system, you won't. There's absolutely no need for ultraviolet in there. Mostly just blue, like an actinic is absolutely appropriate, and then just a little of it, so it's not super bright, just kind of a dim blue glow, I guess, if you wanted any light, but you wouldn't need any.
So maybe just a tiny amount, just to light it up, enough for you to see it, kind of make it blue, and that'd be really cool. Mm-hmm. I love it. I was wondering if you had any questions for our viewers. We kind of talked about one thing.
Well, one of the issues I've had so far with the system, I don't know if it's related to water quality, if it's something that has to do with something being leached from the substrate or what, I do not know. Maybe the flow. I know I could have more flow in here. But an issue I've had with feeding so far, we'll have some pictures in here of what the micrantha looked like when I got it, but even when it opens after dark, the tentacles are just these little stubby things that don't appear to be able to grasp food. The nematocysts seem unable to discharge or something. So it's made it incredibly difficult to feed. And strangely enough, I think I'm seeing the same thing with the other tubastria, the sun coral, and even I think the dendrophilia that I've had for a year. It seems too that even that one, now that it's in here, the tentacles are stubbier, and the nematocysts, I believe, are impaired in some way. So if anybody out there has any idea what might cause that or a way to remedy it, just throw them in the comments or something like that, and I'd love to try something different.
So it's a very cool tank. Non-photosynthetic, something I'm personally very interested in. So thank you so much for showing us your non-photosynthetic tank, and maybe we'll come back someday and check it out again if we have some more success with it. We'll see how it goes.
Hopefully it'll look a lot more impressive, but that'd be great.
But no, I'm love checking out your tank. So thank you so much for having me over to check it out, and we'll see you guys on the next episode of Mile High Reefers. And if you're not already using Hydrospace's products, check them out. Hydrospace.com?
Hydrospace.store.
.store, sorry. So Hydrospace.store, they got your PNS Pro Bio, Yellow Snow, and since we talked last, you've got a new product.
Yep, only available at stores though, not on our website, exclusively at Algae Barn and certain LFSs. It's called Substrate Sauce, and it's mainly for cycling aquariums. Has an additional species of bacteria in it and a slight excess of phosphate to promote bacterial growth during the cycling period, so check that out as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Ken. I appreciate your time, and we'll see you guys on the next episode of Mile High Reefers. And before we go, I'd like to do a shout out to Levi at NPS Reefer. If you'd like to check out a beautiful, well cared for, fully stocked NPS system, visit NPS Reefer's channel on YouTube, and I've got him linked down below. Thanks for watching.